I stood in my truck, engine still running, staring at the concrete monstrosity that had consumed my family's century-old barn. 6 months. I had been gone for 6 months caring for my dying father, and in that time they had destroyed everything. The red oak timbers that my great-grandfather had hewn by hand were gone. The hayloft where I had played as a child was gone. The weathered boards that had weathered 100 storms were replaced by cold, gray concrete walls stretching 40 feet into the sky. But it was not just a barn they had stolen. It was my heritage, my memories, my land. As I climbed out of the truck, my hands shaking with rage, I found the first official notice taped to what used to be the barn door. It bore the seal of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. That is when I realized they had declared war on the wrong person. The drive up to my ranch should have felt like coming home. After 6 months in Ohio watching my father waste away from cancer, I needed the peace of my 40 acres. I needed the smell of hay and the sound of cattle lowing in the distance. I needed normal. Instead, I got a nightmare. The first thing I noticed was wrong was the gate. My old wooden gate with the hand-painted ranch sign had been replaced with a steel monstrosity bearing a sign that read Authorized Personnel Only Meadowbrook Estates Development Zone 7. My stomach dropped as I punched in the gate code, praying it still worked. It did not. I had to get out and manually override the system using the hidden backup switch my grandfather had installed decades ago. As the gate creaked open, dread settled in my chest like a stone. The gravel road looked different, wider, newer. Heavy machinery had scarred the earth on both sides, leaving deep ruts that spoke of massive construction equipment. My prize oak trees, some over 100 years old, were gone. Stumps dotted the landscape like tombstones. Then I saw it. Where my barn had stood for over a century, a concrete warehouse squatted like a gray cancer against the sky. It was massive, easily twice the size of my old barn, with loading docks and industrial lighting. The structure looked like it belonged in a commercial district, not on my rural ranch. I slammed on the brakes so hard my truck fishtailed in the gravel. For a long moment I just sat there, engine idling, trying to process what I was seeing. This could not be real. This could not be my property. I had driven up the wrong road. I had made a mistake. But there was the old windmill, still turning lazily in the breeze. There was the creek bed where I had caught my first fish. There was the hill where my father had taught me to shoot. This was my land, and they had butchered it. I got out of the truck on unsteady legs and walked toward the warehouse like a man approaching his own execution. The closer I got, the more details assaulted my senses. Fresh concrete, the smell of industrial paint, security cameras mounted high on the walls, their red lights blinking like evil eyes. Around the back of the structure, I found the remnants of my barn. Pieces of the old red boards had been pushed into a burn pile, charred and broken. My grandfather's hand-forged iron hinges lay twisted in the dirt. The wooden beam where he had carved his initials in 1924 was split and tossed aside like garbage. I fell to my knees in the dirt and wept. When the tears finally stopped, I noticed the papers. They were scattered around the construction site, some pinned under rocks, others taped to light poles. Official-looking documents with county seals and legal language I did not understand. The first one I read made my blood turn to ice. Notice of eminent domain proceedings. Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, acting under County Resolution 2024-847, hereby claims development rights to property 447B for legitimate community improvement purposes. My hands shook as I read document after document, building permits, environmental assessments, zoning variances, all dated during the months I had been away, all bearing signatures I did not recognize, all claiming authority over my land. I pulled out my phone and dialed the number listed on the HOA letterhead. A cheerful voice answered on the second ring. Meadowbrook Estates HOA, this is Sandra. How can I help you? This is Jake Morrison. You people built something on my property without permission. I want it removed, today. The line went quiet for a moment. Then Sandra's voice returned, no longer cheerful. Mr. Morrison, according to our records, the development on Lot 447B was completed according to all applicable permits and regulations. The structure serves the legitimate community interests of Meadowbrook Estates residents. Community interests, I shouted into the phone. You tore down my family's barn. Sir, I will need you to direct any further concerns through our legal department. Have a nice day. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, then at the warehouse, then at the scattered remains of my heritage. In that moment, I understood something that would change everything. This was not a mistake. This was not an accident. This was theft, pure and simple. And they thought they could get away with it. That night, I did not sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a pot of coffee and every document I had found scattered around the warehouse. Under the harsh fluorescent light, the scope of the betrayal began to emerge. The permits were dated 6 weeks after I had left for Ohio. Someone had been watching. Someone had been waiting. At dawn, I drove to the county courthouse. The clerk, a tired-looking woman named Helen, seemed genuinely surprised when I showed her the documents. These permits were fast-tracked, she said, frowning at her computer screen. Usually a project this size takes months of review. This went through in less than 2 weeks. Who signed off on it? Helen's frown deepened. That is strange, the property owner's signature. It says Jake Morrison. That is you, right? I leaned over the counter to look at the screen. There was my name, in handwriting that was close to mine but not quite right. The signature was forged. I never signed anything, I said. I was not even in the state. Helen printed out copies of everything and handed them to me with shaking hands. Mr. Morrison, if what you are saying is true, this is serious fraud. The next stop was my neighbor, Bill Henderson. Bill had ranched the land next to mine for 30 years. If anyone knew what had happened, it would be him. I found him in his barn working on a tractor engine. When he saw me, his face went pale. Jake, he said quietly, I wondered when you would get back. You knew about this. Bill wiped his hands on a rag and would not meet my eyes. They came to me first, last spring, offered to buy my land for 3 times what it was worth. And I told them no, told them this land had been in my family for generations, same as yours. He finally looked up at me. That is when things got difficult. Bill told me about the harassment that had followed, code violations for imaginary problems, fines for livestock that allegedly wandered onto HOA property, even though his cattle had never left his pasture, anonymous complaints about noise and smells from his farm operations. They made my life hell for 6 months, he said. Then they moved on to easier targets. Other people. The Johnsons sold last fall. The Martinez family gave up in December. Both took buyout offers rather than keep fighting. Bill shook his head. I should have warned you somehow, should have called. Why did you not? Bill was quiet for a long moment. Because I was scared, he admitted. These people have money, Jake, real money, and they have connections. That afternoon, I drove into town and found Maria Santos, the clerk at the county planning office. Maria had helped my father with permits for years. She knew our family. "Jake," she said when she saw me, "I heard about your barn. I am so sorry." "You knew?" Maria nodded, looking around nervously. "The permits came through my office. But Jake, something was not right about them. The signatures, the rush job, the pressure from above to approve everything without the normal review." "Pressure from who?" "County Commissioner Walsh. He personally called me 3 times to make sure those permits were processed immediately." Maria leaned closer and lowered her voice. "Jake, Walsh's brother-in-law owns Morrison Construction. They are the ones who built your warehouse." The pieces were falling into place, and the picture they formed made me sick. That evening, I called every lawyer in the county. The first 3 told me they were too busy to take my case. The fourth was more honest. "Mr. Morrison, I would love to help you, but I cannot. The HOA has retained Palmer, Webster, and Associates. They have every major firm in the county on retainer, specifically to prevent conflicts of interest." "Prevent conflicts, or prevent me from getting representation?" The lawyer was quiet for a moment. "I think you know the answer to that." As I hung up the phone, I realized the full scope of what I was facing. This was not just about my barn. This was about a systematic campaign to seize land and property using fraudulent permits, corrupt officials, and legal manipulation. They had planned this carefully. They had resources, connections, and experience. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had messed with the wrong rancher. The first violation notice appeared on my front door 3 days later. According to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, my fence was non-compliant with community standards and needed to be replaced within 30 days or face daily fines of $500. The fence in question was the same rail fence my grandfather had built in 1952. By the end of the week, I had received 14 more notices. My mailbox was apparently too rustic. My gravel driveway needed to be paved. My windmill was an unsightly obstruction. Even my cattle were cited as a nuisance livestock presence incompatible with residential development standards. Each notice came with the same threat: comply within 30 days or face escalating daily fines that could reach thousands of dollars. The phone calls started next. "Mr. Morrison, this is Bradley Walsh from the HOA Legal Department. We need to discuss your compliance issues and your outstanding assessment fees." Assessment fees. The warehouse facility provides community storage and commercial space that benefits all residents. Your share of the construction assessment is $47,000, due immediately. I had hung up on Walsh, but he kept calling. His voice got less friendly each time. "Mr. Morrison, you are making this much harder than it needs to be. Accept the facility, pay your fees, and we can all move forward." "I want my barn back." "That is not possible. The old structure was condemned and removed for safety reasons. The new facility is a significant improvement to your property value." "It is not my facility. I did not want it. I did not authorize it." "Mr. Morrison, the permits are in order. The construction was legal and proper. Continuing to fight this will only cost you money you do not have." The sabotage started small. My water well pump stopped working. When I called the repair company, they told me someone had cut the electrical line. My ranch gate was found open 3 mornings in a row, and I had to spend hours rounding up scattered cattle. Then things escalated. My tractor would not start because someone had poured sand in the oil. The lock on my feed barn was cut, and thousands of dollars worth of grain was scattered across the ground. My prize bull, Thunder, was found limping with a nail in his hoof. I called the sheriff's department each time. Deputy Martinez would come out, take a report, and tell me there was nothing he could do. Probably teenagers, he would say, or maybe some of your cattle got loose and knocked things around. Deputy, someone is systematically destroying my property. Mr. Morrison, unless you have witnesses or video evidence, there is not much we can investigate. These seem like civil matters anyway. Maybe you should work things out with your HOA. The local newspaper would not return my calls. When I drove to their office, the editor, Tom Bradley, would not see me. His secretary, looking embarrassed, told me they could not cover ongoing legal disputes. I drove to the next town and tried the TV station there. The news director listened politely to my story, then shook his head. Mr. Morrison, we would love to help, but we do not have the resources to investigate complex property disputes. Have you tried working with your homeowners association? Everywhere I turned, doors slammed shut. The system that was supposed to protect property rights and individual citizens had been turned against me. My savings account drained rapidly. Legal consultations, property repairs, and lost income from the chaos of constant harassment ate through the money I had saved for years. My credit cards climbed toward their limits. The worst part was the isolation. Friends and family started avoiding me. When I tried to explain what was happening, I could see the doubt in their eyes. Maybe you should just accept the settlement, my sister Sarah said during one painful phone call. Is it really worth destroying your health and your finances? This is not about money, Sarah. This is about right and wrong. But Jake, fighting City Hall never works. You are just one person against a whole organization. Maybe it is time to cut your losses. Even my closest friend, Tom Williams, suggested I was being unreasonable. Jake, I have seen that warehouse. It is actually pretty nice. Modern, secure, climate-controlled. Maybe they did you a favor. They stole my land, Tom. But did they really? I mean, if they have all the proper permits. That night, I sat alone on my front porch, looking out at the warehouse that squatted on the spot where my barn had stood. The security lights cast harsh shadows across my property, turning familiar landscape into something alien and hostile. For the first time since this nightmare began, I wondered if everyone was right. Maybe I should give up. Maybe I should take whatever settlement they offered and try to rebuild somewhere else. But as I sat there in the darkness, I thought about my grandfather, about the calluses on his hands from building that barn board by board, about my father teaching me to work with my hands and stand up for what was right. They were counting on me to give up. They were counting on the system to wear me down. That was their mistake. The turnaround began with a phone call from someone I had never expected to hear from. Her name was Linda Patterson, and she had worked in the HOA office for 3 years before quitting the previous month. Mr. Morrison, I heard about what they did to your property. I know you probably do not trust anyone right now, but I have information you need. We met at a diner in the next county. Linda was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder as she spoke. What I am about to tell you could get me in serious trouble, she said, but I cannot sleep at night knowing what they are doing. Linda pulled out a manila folder filled with photocopied documents. The warehouse on your property is not the first illegal construction project. They have been doing this for 2 years, targeting rural properties on the edge of their jurisdiction. The documents showed a pattern of fraud that made my case look simple by comparison. Forged signatures on dozens of permits. Shell companies created to hide the true ownership of construction projects. kickbacks to county officials disguised as consulting fees. The warehouse on your land is worth over $2 million when you count the equipment inside, Linda said. They are using it to store machinery and materials for other illegal developments. Why did you not report this before? Linda looked down at her coffee. Because I was scared. These people have connections everywhere. Police, judges, county commissioners. They make problems disappear. What changed your mind? My daughter. She asked me what I do for work, and I realized I could not explain it in a way that would make her proud of me. Linda gave me names, phone numbers, and copies of financial records that proved the conspiracy went deeper than I had imagined. But more importantly, she gave me hope. You are not alone in this, Mr. Morrison. There are others. The first ally I contacted was Robert Chen, a county building inspector who had been asking uncomfortable questions about the rushed permits. Linda had marked his name in her files as trustworthy. Robert agreed to meet me at the warehouse site. As he examined the structure, his expression grew increasingly grim. This building violates at least 12 safety codes, he said. The foundation is not adequate for this size structure. The electrical work was not inspected. The drainage system dumps directly into the creek without proper filtration. Can you put that in writing? I can do better than that. I can order it condemned. But Robert warned me that his report alone would not be enough. They will fight this with lawyers and political pressure. You need more than building code violations. The second breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Maria Santos from the county planning office called me at home one evening. Jake, I have been thinking about what you said, about standing up for what is right. Her voice was shaky but determined. I made copies of everything before I was told to destroy the files. Maria had preserved records that proved the permits were backdated and the signatures were forged. More importantly, she had recorded phone calls from Commissioner Walsh pressuring her to approve permits without proper review. I kept the recordings because I was afraid they would try to blame me if anything went wrong, she explained. I never thought I would need them like this. With Linda's inside information, Robert's building violations, and Maria's documented evidence of corruption, I finally had enough ammunition to fight back. But I still needed legal help. That help came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Hayes was a former prosecutor who had left the district attorney's office to start her own practice. Unlike the other lawyers I had contacted, she was not afraid of the HOA's legal team. Mr. Morrison, what they did to you is not just a civil matter. This is criminal fraud, she said after reviewing my evidence. And I know exactly who we need to contact. Jennifer introduced me to Detective Sarah Mitchell from the State Attorney General's office. Detective Mitchell specialized in public corruption cases, and when she saw the evidence we had gathered, she smiled for the first time since I had started this fight. Mr. Morrison, you have just handed me a case I have been trying to build for 6 months. We have been investigating Commissioner Walsh for bid rigging, but we needed proof of the pattern. The final piece of the puzzle came from investigative journalist David Park from the state Capitol newspaper. David had been tracking HOA corruption statewide and was eager to expose the Meadowbrook Estates operation. This is not just about your barn, David explained. This is about a system of legal theft that is spreading across rural communities throughout the state. Your case could be the key to stopping it. By winter, my team was complete. Linda provided inside information. Robert documented building violations. Maria offered proof of permit fraud. Jennifer developed the legal strategy. Detective Mitchell built the criminal case. David prepared to expose everything to the public. We had evidence, we had allies, we had a plan. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a chance. The HOA had resources and connections, but they had gotten overconfident. They had made mistakes. They had created enemies among their own employees. Most importantly, they had underestimated what happens when you push a man too far. I was no longer fighting alone, and I was no longer fighting defensively. It was time to go on the offensive. The plan we developed was elegant in its simplicity. We would give the HOA exactly what they wanted to hear, then document everything they said and did in response. Jennifer Hayes came up with the initial strategy. We need them to incriminate themselves on record. The best way to do that is to make them think they have won. I did not like the idea of appearing to surrender, but I understood the logic. The HOA leaders had gotten away with their schemes for so long that they had become arrogant. That arrogance would be their downfall. The first step was to leak false information to test their surveillance network. Linda Patterson, still maintaining contact with her former colleagues, let slip that I was considering bankruptcy and might be willing to sell my property for a fraction of its value. Within 48 hours, I received a call from Bradley Walsh. "Mr. Morrison, I heard you might be reconsidering your position regarding the community development project." "I am tired of fighting," I said, letting exhaustion creep into my voice. "Maybe it is time to be realistic about my situation." "I think that is very wise. Why do not we set up a meeting to discuss terms?" The meeting was scheduled for the following week at the HOA office. What Walsh did not know was that Jennifer had equipped me with a recording device, and Detective Mitchell had positioned surveillance teams to document everyone who attended. The trap was set, but we needed more evidence of ongoing criminal activity. That is where Robert Chen proved invaluable. Robert had discovered that the warehouse on my property was being used to store equipment for other illegal construction projects. But we needed proof that HOA leaders knew about and approved these activities. "I have an idea," Robert said during one of our strategy sessions. "What if we arrange for them to show you what else they are planning?" The second phase of our plan involved David Park, the investigative journalist. David had been building relationships with disgruntled residents in other communities where the HOA was operating. These residents provided intelligence about future targets and ongoing projects. "They are planning to expand into Riverside County next," David reported. "They have already identified 12 properties they want to acquire through the same methods they used on you." This information gave us leverage for the final phase of our trap. During my surrender meeting with Walsh, I would express interest in becoming a partner in their expansion plans. This would encourage them to reveal details about their criminal enterprise while believing I was now on their side. Detective Mitchell coordinated with federal authorities, since the fraud crossed county lines and involved multiple jurisdictions. Once they start talking about their future plans, we will have them on conspiracy charges as well as the fraud and theft charges we are already building. The most dangerous part of the plan was the HOA meeting where I would publicly appear to capitulate while secretly recording everything. Linda Patterson had learned that the board was planning to use my surrender as an example to intimidate other property owners who might resist their future projects. "They want to make a show of your defeat," Linda warned. "Board President Margaret Stevens plans to have you publicly apologize and thank the HOA for improving your property." The humiliation was designed to break the spirit of anyone else who might consider fighting back. but we planned to turn their moment of triumph into their moment of downfall. Jennifer had arranged for backup recording equipment to be hidden throughout the meeting room. David Park would attend as a guest, documenting everything for his exposé. Detective Mitchell would be monitoring from a van outside, ready to move if the situation became dangerous. "Remember," Jennifer coached me before the meeting, "let them talk. The more confident they become, the more they will reveal. Your job is to ask questions that get them to explain their methods and their future plans." The night before the confrontation, I sat on my porch looking at the warehouse that had started this whole nightmare. In a few hours, I would walk into a room full of criminals and pretend to surrender everything my family had built over generations. But this time, I would not be walking in alone. This time, I had allies, evidence, and a plan. This time, I was the one setting the trap. Margaret Stevens and her board of thieves were expecting a broken man ready to give up his fight. Instead, they were going to get a man who had spent months preparing for this exact moment. They thought they were about to celebrate their victory over another victim. They had no idea they were about to confess their crimes to law enforcement officers who had been waiting months for exactly this opportunity. The trap was set. Tomorrow, everything would change. The morning of reckoning began at 6 a.m. when David Park's article went live simultaneously across 3 major newspapers and 2 online news platforms. The headline read, "Rural Land Grab: How One HOA Built a Criminal Empire Through Fraud and Corruption." By 7 a.m., my phone was ringing with calls from reporters, lawyers, and federal investigators. By 8 a.m., Detective Mitchell called to inform me that search warrants had been executed at the HOA office, Commissioner Walsh's home, and the offices of Morrison Construction. "We found everything," she said, excitement clear in her voice. "Financial records, forged documents, recorded conversations between board members discussing future targets. Your case just became the foundation for a federal racketeering investigation." But the real fireworks were scheduled for that evening's emergency HOA meeting. I arrived at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center at 7 p.m. sharp, just as I had promised Bradley Walsh I would. The parking lot was packed with cars, and news vans from 3 television stations were setting up equipment near the entrance. Margaret Stevens, the HOA board president, met me at the door with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Mr. Morrison, I am so pleased you decided to be reasonable about this situation. Tonight will be a fresh start for everyone." "I am looking forward to it," I replied, patting the recording device hidden in my jacket pocket. The meeting room was standing room only. Residents I had never seen before packed the space, along with reporters, county officials, and several men in suits who I suspected were federal agents. Stevens called the meeting to order and immediately launched into her prepared remarks about community cooperation and the importance of working together for the common good. "Tonight, we have a special announcement from Mr. Jake Morrison, who has decided to embrace the community improvements made to his property." She gestured for me to stand, expecting me to deliver the humiliating surrender speech they had demanded. Instead, I remained seated and pulled out a thick folder of documents. "Actually, Margaret, I have some questions about those improvements." Stephen's smile faltered. "Questions?" "Yes. For instance, I am curious about the permits for the warehouse you built on my land. Specifically, I am wondering how my signature appeared on documents when I was not even in the state." The room went completely silent. Stevens looked around nervously, clearly not expecting this turn of events. Mr. Morrison, I think there may be some confusion about the timeline. No confusion at all, I interrupted, standing up and addressing the packed room. I have copies of the original permit applications, complete with forged signatures and backdated approvals. I began distributing copies of the evidence to reporters and residents throughout the room. Stevens tried to regain control of the meeting, but her voice was drowned out by the sound of people examining the documents and talking among themselves. Bradley Walsh stood up from the back of the room. Mr. Morrison, this is not the appropriate forum for these accusations. If you have concerns, they should be addressed through proper legal channels. You mean the proper legal channels that you and your friends have been corrupting for the past 2 years? I replied, pulling out more documents. I have financial records showing payments to county officials, including Commissioner Walsh's brother-in-law's construction company. The room erupted in angry voices as residents realized they had been lied to about the scope and legality of the HOA's activities. Stevens banged her gavel frantically, trying to restore order. "This meeting is adjourned," she shouted. "Actually, Margaret, I do not think it is." Detective Mitchell stepped into the room, followed by 6 federal agents and 3 county sheriff's deputies. "Ladies and gentlemen, I am Detective Sarah Mitchell with the State Attorney General's office. We have warrants for the arrest of Margaret Stevens, Bradley Walsh, and Robert Morrison on charges of fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, and theft of public funds." The next few minutes were chaos. Stevens tried to run, but was stopped at the door by a federal agent. Walsh attempted to destroy documents but was tackled by 2 deputies before he could reach his briefcase. As the arrests proceeded, I found myself surrounded by reporters asking for statements and residents demanding answers about what this meant for their community. David Park appeared at my side with a camera crew. "Mr. Morrison, how does it feel to see justice finally being served?" "It feels like the system can still work when good people refuse to give up," I replied, watching as Stevens was led away in handcuffs. But the evening was not over yet. Jennifer Hayes had coordinated with federal prosecutors to ensure that civil asset forfeiture procedures were initiated immediately. As the criminal arrests were taking place, other agents were seizing the warehouse on my property and freezing all HOA accounts pending investigation. Commissioner Walsh's arrest warrant was executed simultaneously at his home, where agents found over $200,000 in cash and additional evidence of the bribery scheme. The local news coverage that night was extensive. Every station led with the story of the HOA corruption scandal, featuring interviews with residents who had been victimized and experts who explained how the scheme had operated. This appears to be one of the most sophisticated property fraud operations we have seen in this state, the Attorney General said in a televised statement. The evidence suggests a pattern of criminal activity spanning multiple counties and involving numerous public officials. As I drove home that night, I passed the warehouse that had started this whole nightmare. But now, instead of security lights and no trespassing signs, it was surrounded by crime scene tape and federal agents conducting their investigation. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe freely. The criminals who had stolen my land and destroyed my barn were in jail. The corruption that had enabled their crimes was being exposed and prosecuted. The system that had failed me was finally working. But more importantly, the message had been sent to every other group of criminals who thought they could use legal intimidation and political corruption to steal from hardworking families. Sometimes, when you push the wrong person too far, They push back harder than you ever imagined possible. 6 months later, I stood in the exact spot where my family's barn had been torn down, watching a crew of workers put the finishing touches on its replacement. The new barn was bigger than the original, built with modern materials but designed to honor the traditional architecture my grandfather had loved. The construction was being paid for by the court-ordered restitution from the HOA criminal enterprise. In total, the federal investigation had recovered over $8 million in stolen assets, fraudulent fees, and illegal profits. Margaret Stevens had been sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for racketeering and fraud. Bradley Walsh received 5 years for his role in the conspiracy. Commissioner Walsh was sentenced to 4 years and forced to resign from office in disgrace. But the individual sentences were just the beginning of the justice that had been served. The civil lawsuit that Jennifer Hayes had filed on behalf of me and 17 other victims had resulted in a settlement of $12 million. My share was enough to not only rebuild my barn and repair all the damage to my property, but also to establish a legal defense fund for other rural property owners facing similar threats. The warehouse that had symbolized my violation was demolished within weeks of the arrests. The federal government had seized it as evidence of criminal activity, then sold it back to me for $1 so I could have it torn down and the land restored. Watching the concrete monster being reduced to rubble had been one of the most satisfying moments of my life. The broader impact of our victory extended far beyond my personal situation. The investigative reporting that David Park had coordinated led to a statewide grand jury investigation of HOA corruption. 12 other communities were found to have similar schemes operating, resulting in 43 additional arrests and the recovery of over $30 million in stolen property and fraudulent fees. The state legislature passed emergency legislation strengthening property rights protections and requiring independent oversight of all HOA activities. The law was informally known as the Morrison Act, though I had tried to convince them to use a less personal name. Your case became the symbol of the fight against corruption, State Senator Maria Rodriguez told me during the bill signing ceremony. People needed to see that individuals could still stand up to powerful interests and win. The personal transformation had been just as dramatic as the legal victory. What had begun as a fight to save my barn had evolved into a calling to help others facing similar injustices. I established the Rural Property Rights Foundation using part of my settlement money. The foundation provided legal assistance, investigative resources, and public advocacy for property owners dealing with government overreach or corporate abuse. Linda Patterson became the foundation's first full-time investigator. Her insider knowledge of HOA operations made her invaluable in identifying and documenting similar schemes in other communities. I spent 3 years helping criminals steal from families, she told me during one of our early strategy meetings. I want to spend the rest of my career helping families fight back. Robert Chen left his county job to become our technical consultant, helping property owners document building code violations and permit fraud. Maria Santos joined our team as a document analyst, using her expertise to identify forged signatures and fraudulent applications. Detective Mitchell was promoted to head a new state task force focused on property fraud and public corruption. Our success had demonstrated the need for specialized law enforcement resources to combat these sophisticated criminal enterprises. Your case showed us how to follow the money trail, she explained. Now we are applying those same techniques to break up similar operations before they can victimize as many people. David Park's reporting on our case won a state journalism award and led to a book contract. He donated half of his advance to the foundation, saying that the story belonged to all of us who had fought for justice. The rebuilt barn became a symbol of resilience and renewal. I held the dedication ceremony on the 2-year anniversary of discovering the warehouse, inviting everyone who had helped in the fight against corruption. My sister Sarah, who had initially urged me to give up, spoke at the ceremony about the importance of standing up for principles even when the odds seem impossible. 2 years ago, I thought my brother was being foolish, she said. I was worried about his finances, his health, his future. I did not understand that some battles have to be fought regardless of the cost. Tom Williams, my friend who had suggested I should accept the warehouse, became